Greetings, good people of the internet. I am, of course, Eric Grooms, the film score fanatic, here with a review of the newest chapter in the Mandalorian titled The Prisoner. So let's just jump into it. I'll say right off the bat that, as always, I'm going to talk about the episode, so that means there's going to be some spoiler type stuff. I'll try to keep it light for the most part, but if you haven't seen the episode and you don't want to be spoiled for anything, you probably need to go ahead and watch it and then come back and check out what I have to say. That being said, let's just get started. So first off, the episode starts. Well, let's not even talk about the very beginning of the episode. Let's talk about the previously on, which I thought was a well-cut little bit that kind of really got you excited for what we've seen already and what we're going to see in this episode, it seemed. Some of the kind of cooler action bits, but that's a really small thing. That's not a big important part of the episode. But I thought they cut that together pretty neatly, nicely, whatever. But anyway, into this episode. The score I was impressed with. To me, this was the best episode so far when it comes to Ludwig Göransson's score. I have been hot and cold on his work for this series so far. But this episode, and maybe it's just the subject matter of the episode, was particularly congruent to his imagination or whatever, but it seemed like, to me, he had the most interesting and exciting musical ideas to go with this episode, so I was very pleased with that. Score is an important thing to me. And so finally I felt like there was an episode, like a full episode, where none of it was really bothersome to me. So there's even a bit where it kind of gets more action-y, and the score accompanies that as it, in the way that it should. And something happens with the Mandalorian involved, and they really nicely tied in the flute motif that they use for the Mandalorian's theme. So really like that part of this episode. Moving on. This was the second episode directed by Rick Famuyiwa, and he has impressed me with his two chapters. He did chapter 2, which, that had some kind of goofy, lots of walking stuff in it, but it also had some of the more memorable, in my opinion, kind of Mando action bits. The bit with him trying to attack the sandcrawler was extremely entertaining, and it was fun to watch. But it also had, I think that episode, chapter 2, had some of the best Star Wars comic bits in it. And this episode, I feel like, continued some of those trends with Famuyiwa's direction. This one didn't have as much of the comedy. There's a bit with a character kind of saying, get a room kind of joke that made me tee-hee a little bit. But then there's another part where a character has a door start to shut on him, but he's super strong, so he starts to open the door back up. and this is a Star Wars ship. There's a second door, one door's closing this way and the other door closes this way. And that actually made me chuckle because I wasn't expecting that, and neither was the character in the scene. It was played very well for a little laugh. So I think Rick Famuyiwa has done a fantastic job with his duties in the director chair in this series so far. So that's been pleasant. So I would certainly love to see him in the next season doing some work. I haven't looked up who they've tapped for directing, if they've even mentioned it. But I certainly hope they keep bringing him back. We had some, finally, well, I shouldn't say finally, but it seemed like we had some really good Mandalorian actually knowing what he's doing moments. We've seen glimpses of it here and there, but it's been really inconsistent, to say the least, throughout this series. Sometimes he seems like he just has no clue how to, like, they can't decide if he's a new guy who's like building up his abilities and getting better as he goes, or if he's already an established presence in the bounty hunting world, because it seems like everyone knows who the Mandalorian is before the major plot of this series came to be, and that is obviously the Baby Yoda stuff. Even before that, it seemed like, he kind of had a reputation for being a pretty slick dude, but we keep seeing him fail all the time, which is fine. Like, there has to be stakes, but some of the failures seem like they're his own incompetence. So it was nice in this episode to see highly competent action from him, and those are directing and writing choices. So I don't know if the inconsistency, if that's on Jon Favreau, who's doing the overall show running. If it feels like he needs to maybe do a better job of making sure that the directors on each episode are doing more consistent character work. I don't know. I'm not an expert. Jon Favreau is certainly far above me when it comes to knowing what he's doing, but I'm allowed to criticize. But that being said, I trust that he knows what he's doing overall. But not everyone's perfect. You make mistakes sometimes. This is not as big a deal as I'm making it sound right now, but this episode was refreshing because he really did show off some great skills. In the scene with the droids, we know it's been established that this character has a not too rosy of a disposition towards droids, so he demolishes a group of them, and it was pretty fun to watch, pretty impressive. Great choreography, I think. Interesting side note on this, these are New Republic droids that are reminiscent. They were reminiscent to me of Imperial like prison droids, so that was kind of strange. It makes sense that the New Republic would have to rely on droids in some ways for security and stuff like that, considering they didn't have the largest contingent of people to keep security throughout the galaxy or anything like that, but it did seem a little strange to have like kind of imposing droids in their employ. It seems more of a New Republic, and which came from the rebellion, so it basically feels like the rebellion. Like, they're more human fighters. Again, this is a nitpick. The droids looked cool, and they provided a right foil for the action in this episode. So, you know, it worked. I'm just nitpicking because of what the rebellion / New Republic kind of always seemed like it would operate. So moving on, not a big deal. So this episode had all the cameos. I mean, all the cameos. We've kind of had, a cameo in each episode, at least one, and sometimes two, and it seems like maybe there's been a progression of a little bit more cameo action. This one, this just steps it up. If we're following a trajectory where the cameos keep getting bigger and bigger with each episode, we're gonna have like 7 cameos in the next chapter and like 10 in the last one. But let's talk about some of those cameos. First of all, I didn't recognize his face because he's covered in makeup and prosthetics, but I immediately recognized Clancy Brown's voice, and that was very delightful for me. He is no stranger to the Star Wars universe. He has provided voice work in many projects in many forms. In the Clone Wars animated series, he was Darth Maul's brother. I never really figured out if they were actually like blood related brothers or if that's just a thing for Dathomirian males to like have brotherhood with each other or something. I don't know. But he played a character called Savage Opress. Savage Opress, hilarious, but a pretty cool character in that animated series.
My lord.
Is it finished?
Yes. The temple has been taken.
And the Jedi?
Dead.
And I'm pretty sure he did other voices, but that was like his main starring role of voice work. And then he was a character in the animated Rebels series. I don't remember the name of that character, but it's his voice, and he's got a great voice. But that was kind of a nice thing to see him doing some live action acting for the Star Wars universe. He's got the connections. He's worked with Dave Filoni a bunch, and so that was a lot of fun. And he's playing Deveronian. Is that what they're called? It's the character that you've seen in the cantina in A New Hope. The guy that looks like a devil. So speaking of him being devilish, there's a moment in this episode where the Mandalorian is fighting him one-on-one, and he employs his flamethrower on his arm and puts it in the guy's face, and he just takes it, and that was pretty glorious. And Clancy Brown with his awesome deep gravelly voice, just shakes it off, and he's just like, I loved it. It was a good little moment. Next character in this little group, another voice that I recognized and was happy to hear, because the work that I've heard him in before I enjoyed, and that's Richard Ayoade. I don't know how you say his last name. Ayoade. I don't know. If you've seen him, you've seen him in the IT Crowd. But I recognize his voice from Laika's The Box Trolls from, what was that, like 2013 or 2012 or something like that. Laika is the animation studio that does all the kind of like hand puppet animated work that's beautiful, and they still haven't won a Best Picture or a Best Animated Feature Oscar, even though they totally deserve it at some point. But anyway, he played a character in that was really delightful.
You ever think about the universe, Mr. Trout? What if our world is just like a tiny speck?
A tiny little speck.
And there are giants looking down on us.
And every time we move,
It's actually them moving us.
But it's kind of interesting to have kind of a similar sounding accent in both of the major droids that we've seen in this series. Obviously, totally different nationalities. Richard Ayoade is from England. He's British. And Taika Waititi is well known as a Kiwi, a New Zealander. But similar sounding accents, and they both work really great with that kind of techno editing that they do to make the voice sound a little more robotic. So that was good. Plus the character design was really cool. I really enjoyed the way it looked. It looked really cool, for lack of a better word. Like, just looked cool. So next we have another a recognizable alien species in Star Wars, a Twi'lek or Twi'lek. I think it's Twi'lek is probably how it's pronounced properly. But I had no idea that this was somebody that I knew until I looked it up, and it's Osha from Game of Thrones, or I would say better known as Nymphadora Tonks from the Harry Potter series. It's Natalia, what was her last name? Tina? Like, I had no idea, but I knew it had to be somebody, like, you could kind of tell from the voice it was somebody familiar. So that was fun, and she was chewing up scenery, like, not in a bad way. Her character kind of had this wicked, kind of maniacal twist to her that I found really enjoyable. And it worked in the group in a particularly fun way, and I'll talk more about the group here in a second. But well, first of all, we start to meet all these characters from the first character that the Mandalorian meets in this episode, and that is played by another cameo, or I consider it a cameo. His name is Mark Boone Jr., and I think he's probably most famous to most people as a character in the Sons of Anarchy. That's not a show that I watched, but he's very recognizable from that series. I think of him as Detective Bullock in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, but he's like a really recognizable character actor at this point, and he's really reliable as kind of a friendly but also shifty character. Generally, it seems like that's what I don't know what his character was like in Sons of Anarchy, but he kind of puts out that vibe, and he did his job very well in this episode. But anyway, then we finally get to seeing Bill Burr's character, who is apparently a wicked sweet gunslinger from a galaxy far, far away in Boston. I'm just kidding. He does a fine job, and there's all kinds of human accents in this series. Why not have a Boston guy in it? But his acting is actually really good. He's, he is a stand-up comedian, but I think over the recent years, like he's been getting, not that he was ever bad, but he's been getting like he's been showing more impressive abilities from an acting standpoint, and in that sense, I think his character was really interesting. Apparently, was a sniper for the Imperial military.
He's one of the best triggermen I've ever seen. Former Imperial sharpshooter.
That's not saying much.
I wasn't a stormtrooper, wise ass.
But so that kind of makes our whole group of a little kind of bounty hunting team, and I really liked the dynamic between these people. There was a really fun like concert between all the characters interacting with each other, and they, there was a lot of like cliche character archetypes in this group, but I think they're archetypes for a reason, because it works. It makes for an entertaining dynamic between all of them. So, when we think about the overall impact of this episode, I think maybe that could be one of the reasons that I really enjoyed this episode overall, is all of the acting that was being done by each of these actors off of one another with each other. So yeah, I really like that group dynamic, and that could also inform some of my feelings about the series overall, and my annoyance that we keep getting like one-off characters interacting with the Mandalorian. I want to have more characters acting in groups. I think there's something more interesting about that. So I hope that this is not, I hope that this could be some kind of a trend, that we get kind of more larger groups working together in some way or another. But who knows? I guess we'll see what the future holds. With that kind of group dynamic, it is very reminiscent of a lot of the stuff that we saw in like Dave Filoni's series, the Rebels, or the new series that's in its second season now, Resistance. So in those ways, and this was kind of like a very what's the word I'm looking for? Contained plot, which is very reminiscent of the contained plots that you would find in a lot of these serialized episodes. Well, I shouldn't say serialized, because it's not really serialized. There's a lot of episodes in those animated series that are just like one-off stories, or maybe they have like 2 episode arcs. They're entertaining, but this seemed very familiar in that sense, that it seemed a lot like those animated shows, which wouldn't be surprising because there's a lot of influence from somebody like Dave Filoni, who that is his entire experience up to this point. But a note on this idea of it kind of being reminiscent of animation, and we keep making this comparison, and I say we because I see it elsewhere on the internet, other people kind of saying, man, this feels like one of the animated shows a lot of the time, and I'm catching myself doing it a lot, and it's occurring to me that maybe there's a good reason that we are feeling that way. And I'm not saying maybe there's a good reason that they're doing that, because they might not even really be doing that. The reason that we might be feeling this way about all of these episodes is that the simple fact that so far in the history of Star Wars entertainment, if there was something that was being made in an episodic, serialized, short form, 3-act structure fashion, they were animated shows. Like, there's only ever been animated shows before this show. So if we're thinking of Star Wars shows, the only thing we can compare it to are animated shows. The live action aspect we can relate to the films, but all of the films in this saga are just because of what they are. They're theatrical releases that are 2+ hours long, with epic cinematography and huge blockbuster budgets and stuff like that. While this is a TV show with much stricter budget constraints and shorter episode length and much more contained little 3-act structures. So it's like, I guess the point I'm making is, like, it's unavoidable for it to feel similar to the animated shows because that's all we've ever seen before. So that just occurred to me, and I'm going to try to stop comparing it to that, except for the fact that literally that's all we have it to compare it to when it comes to Star Wars television. So maybe this will get out through the internet and people will start to realize, yeah, there's good reason for us to think it feels like an animated show, because that's all we've ever seen from Star Wars shows. So all of that being said, like I said previously, I am still a little annoyed by the seemingly constant stream of new one-off characters, or I should say seemingly one-off characters. Most of the kind of new characters we met in this episode, we find are still alive, so they could come back in the future, which is great. But it does worry me a little bit. I'm kind of getting tired of seeing these one-off characters, and that goes back to what I was saying about seeing Mando working with a team and whatnot. I want to get more common characters that we see over and over and over again working with the Mandalorian. So yeah. This takes me to my next point, which is also an annoyance for me. Aside from the one-off characters, we also are getting what I call an adventure of the week structure that has become very clearly a trend, at least to me, which is concerning to me when there's only 8 episodes in this season and we have gone through 6, and at least half of the episodes were adventure of the week episodes. Not really adding a whole lot to the character development. I was making excuses for this at the beginning of the series because we were getting like new information about the Mandalorian's character. At this point, we know what his character is. We know what the assets character is like. I want more development of the overall plot. We still haven't met Moff Gideon, which based on the trailers and whatnot, the marketing before this show came out, it seemed like he was going to be the big bad, but I still feel like we haven't met the big bad. But I don't need to get too deep into that before we kind of talk about the wrap up at the end. I did want to make another point, though. To be fair, when it comes to this kind of thing, it's very common for shows in their first season to kind of have a looser overall plot, and to really be doing the adventure of the week structure, which is very reminiscent of some other recent classic kind of television shows that used what you would call the monster of the week structure, which is like the X-Files. That series started out with each episode being its own like little self-contained plot that was based on some weird idea that they came up with. And then as the series progressed, and we got farther into more and more seasons, then it became more in-depth, longer plots that were going on. So, we can kind of hold out some hope that that's going to be happening with this series in the future. Yeah. It's very mildly disappointing for this first season when there's only 8 episodes. I think that's the main thing that's getting the internet a little hot and bothered, is that there's only 8 episodes. So you would think with that you would make it a really robust plot throughout the whole season, but I guess we're just going to keep getting little one-off storylines that don't seem to really add a lot to the overall plot. So, if that's my biggest criticism of the season, that's it, obviously. But I digress. Back to more cameos. We finally saw, so aside from the, organic prisoners, the humans and whatnot speaking of that, one of the prisoners was the same species that we saw in the Solo film that had the 4 arms and was the pilot. I don't remember the name of the species, but that character, I believe, was voiced by Jon Favreau. And I'm wondering if he probably did the voice for this little character that was in a prison cell. Not a long day of work it would have been, because that character just made like a little sound or whatever, and it doesn't matter. We finally met a character on this ship that the team was infiltrating, that wasn't a prisoner. Apparently there is one human person on these New Republic prison transports. And I immediately recognized his face. So this character was a New Republic, prison transport guy. He had the same helmet as the old Rebellion troopers, that white bike helmet looking thing. And had a spiffy new uniform.
You put down your blasters right now.
Nice shoes.
Put down your blasters.
Matches his belt.
But he was really baby-faced, and I recognized his face so well. And so obviously after the episode was over, I had to look up all these people to make sure I knew who everyone was, because there were so many cameos. But I looked him up, and sure enough, I did recognize him. I've seen him in a bunch of interviews, and I've heard his voice a million times. Which he's doing a voice in this small role that disguises it well enough. But he was Anakin Skywalker, the very Anakin Skywalker, the one and only.
I said.
My Padawan is in there.
Now step aside.
General Skywalker, Admiral Tarkin has ordered that no one be allowed in there.
I don't care what she's accused of. Let me in.
From the Clone Wars series. So there's another situation where somebody's got connections to the people in charge, Dave Filoni. So that's a fun little Easter egg for people who are in the know or who care about all this Star Wars canon stuff. Beyond that, he's just a little character in the episode for anybody who's not that plugged in. But that was fun. I would love for them to keep doing that. Just keep bringing in the people who did all the voice work and put them in little cameos. Fingers crossed we see Ashley Eckstein doing something interesting at some point. I could see that not happening because she's got a really distinct voice at this point that's really tied to a special character in particular. But that would be fun. And then we finally get some more cameos. All of the directors except for Taika Waititi, which makes sense because he's already a character in this series. And he's directing the last episode, which means we're probably going to see his character come back because he has to be in everything that he directs. It seems like in some capacity. And Bryce Dallas Howard wasn't in one of the cameos. I don't know if she is going to cameo in any of these episodes. Personally, I think it would have been fun to have all 5 in this scene together, but it worked well with having just 3. But that was a squadron of X-Wing pilots show up at the very end, being led by none other than Dave Filoni. I thought he was in a little sneaky cameo in the last episode, which I still think that may have been him. That was the dead bounty hunter being dragged by the dewback. So I'm gonna hold that theory until it is disproven. But in this one, there's no mistaking. It is him. You see his face and hear him talking, and he's credited, obviously. But his character name is even Trapper Wolf. Was it Trapper? Yeah, Trapper Wolf. The dude loves wolves. If you know 2 things about Dave Filoni, he loves Star Wars and he loves wolves, so that's pretty funny. And then Deborah Chow and Rick Famuyiwa were his wingmen piloting the other X-Wings. So that was a fun little bit. And that concludes all the cameos. This has been Chapter 6, all the cameos. But anyway, overall, I know I've been critical in this review, but that's being critical of like the whole series. I actually think this episode was like my second favorite of the 6 that we've gotten so far. Chapter 3 was probably the best one with all the Mandalorians and everything. Go watch my Chapter 3 review and see what I thought about it. But this one was really fun, and I hope they do more episodes like this. It would be great if they keep bringing some characters back, as I've said before. So I don't really have a lot of spoilery speculation for the future, because at this point it seems like every episode's going to be some self-contained plot. So there's really no point in trying to figure out what the overarching story is. But like, again, I said earlier, we still haven't met Moff Gideon, so I'm guessing we're going to see him sometime in the next 2 episodes. I know that's a shocking, that's a hot take. You heard it here first. We're going to see the guy that we saw in the trailer in one of the next 2 episodes. But I did cheat, and I read the little 1-sentence teasing synopsis for the next episode, and it looks like we're going to see Grief Karga back in, so that's good. Like I said, I want to see some of these characters back and talking to each other. And I'm wondering if there's gonna be, if I do a little speculation, I'm wondering if it's gonna be a little bit like the Lando scenario with Han in Empire Strikes Back, where he's gonna bring him in, maybe trying to extend an olive branch, and we get some double crossing kind of situation. So fingers crossed, we're finally gonna meet Moff Gideon in this next episode, and that'll set up the final action for this season, I'm hoping. But overall for the series at this point, with only 2 chapters left, and we haven't really had a very deep overarching plot, I get the feeling that we're gonna end the season off with kind of a disappointing lack of substantial plot conclusions, I guess I should say. I feel like we've just been getting set up for a big cliffhanger, which is a little annoying. I like when series kind of, build it into each other, but I also like when there's a contained plot for each season. So, let's be hopeful. Stories is about Star Wars is about hope.
Rebellions are built on hope.
So yeah, I guess I'll just keep trying to be hopeful. Did you watch this episode? What did you think? Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with me, if you disagree. Am I getting this right? Am I getting this totally wrong? Who was your favorite character in this group? I kind of enjoyed a little bit of each character, to be honest. Bill Burr's acting, I always loved Bill Burr, so I basically just loved that character's attitude. The Twilight characters was a really cool kind of manic body movement language was really entertaining to me. Clancy Brown was awesome. The droids design, so I kind of loved each of them for one little thing separately. So what did you think? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, like and subscribe. That's going to help the channel out a lot. And especially if you subscribe, you'll be able to see my other reviews and whatnot. A little personal side note. Work has been a real biatch recently, so lots of overtime and really working me to the bone. So that's why I haven't been posting reviews for the last couple weeks as consistently as I was before, because I've just been busy and tired. But I will always be here for a review of Star Wars stuff. So yeah, I have been Eric Grooms, the Film Score Fanatic, and may the Force be with you. I have spoken. This is the way. See you guys.